Okay, I want you to imagine, just for a second, leaving your home for 20 years. And we're not talking about a nice long vacation here. You leave because life just keeps demanding more and more from you. First, you're thrust into a brutal war. Then come the violent storms, terrifying shipwrecks, literal monsters, massive temptations, and just unimaginable loss. You're forced into one impossible choice after another. Until finally, after everything you've managed to survive, you actually return. But then you discover something incredibly profound. The hardest part wasn't actually finding your way back home. No, the hardest part was becoming the kind of person who could live there again. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to map out the hidden architecture of one of humanity's oldest stories, and we're going to uncover exactly what it says about our modern minds.
So about 3,000 years ago, a poet named Homer told this exact story through the eyes of one man in the epic we all know as the Odyssey. But it brings up a really massive question. Why do we keep telling the same story? I mean, whether it's 3,000 years ago on the beaches of ancient Greece, or today sitting in a modern movie theater, humanity seems completely locked into this single, unbreakable narrative loop. It's this continuous loop about a character leaving home, stepping into the unknown, totally losing themselves, fundamentally changing, and then finally coming back.
And this pattern, it goes incredibly deep. I mean, think about it. From the Odyssey to the Lord of the Rings, the Lion King, Harry Potter, Moana, all the way to Interstellar. These stories survive across all these different generations and cultures, and they don't just stick around because they're entertaining. They survive because they are psychologically, spiritually, and biologically true. They're describing these deep patterns that unfold inside every single generation. What this really suggests is that Odysseus isn't just one guy from an old myth. He is every single human being trying to find their way home. Because, the longest journey you will ever take isn't across the world, it's across yourself.
All right, let's dive into the real wounds of war. We're going to be subverting the myth of the fearless hero. Our standard pop culture understanding of Odysseus completely misses how Homer actually introduces him. History's version, the one we all think we know, paints him as this fearless hero, right? The brilliant strategist, the incredibly clever inventor of the Trojan horse who finally ended the war. But actually, when we first truly meet Odysseus in Homer's original text, he is not standing triumphantly on some battlefield. He's not giving a heroic speech. He is literally sitting alone, crying on a beach, day after day. This stark contrast is so important because it shows us that the greatest hero of Greece was in reality a completely broken man. He was struggling under the crushing weight of memories that absolutely no one else could see. Because the absolute deepest wounds, they happen to the story you tell yourself about who you are. See, Odysseus's pain didn't actually come from losing the war. It came from winning it. Just imagine fighting for justice and honor for years, only to survive and slowly realize that your victory destroyed families rather than restoring them, that what you called justice started to look suspiciously like revenge. His pain came from winning and then having to face the terrifying realization that he no longer recognized the person he had to become in order to win.
Your brain is a story. This is what happens when the map no longer matches the territory.
Now we're kind of getting into the science of the soul here. If you look at modern clinical definitions like moral injury or identity collapse, they show us that your brain isn't just a cold hard drive storing facts. It's actively creating an ongoing story. It constantly weaves together your memories, your relationships, your core beliefs, and your hopes into one coherent person. Without that internal narrative, you literally wouldn't know who you are, where you belong, or what tomorrow even means. Your identity is a story your brain is constantly updating. But when an event happens that is just so deeply painful or so profoundly contradictory, that internal story simply shatters.
But here is the crazy part. The ancients already knew all of this. The ancient Greeks had their own terminology for it, a lost soul. This was a person whose internal narrative had completely collapsed, leaving them unable to find their way. It's just fascinating how perfectly this maps onto our modern clinical terms, isn't it? The language is totally different, sure, but the human experience they are describing, it is absolutely identical. So let's walk through how this identity collapse actually plays out in real life. You always start with step one, the old story. I thought the world was safe. I thought I understood who I was. But then comes step two, the contradictory event. This could be a war, a massive personal loss, a severe trauma. Which brings you to step three, the shattered map, where that old illusion of who you were just breaks apart entirely. Modern psychology calls this fragmentation. But then, and this is absolutely crucial, there is step four, individuation. The famous psychologist Carl Jung called it this because that shattering process actually forces you to become someone more whole. Odysseus couldn't just sail home and pick up where he left off, because the man who left Ithaca 20 years prior simply didn't exist anymore. He had to be rebuilt from the ground up.
The danger of comfort. Because honestly, the monsters were the easy part.
You see, surviving literal physical monsters, that wasn't his real challenge. Surviving himself was. Every single place Odysseus visited on his long journey home essentially offered him a counterfeit home, a very tempting substitute designed to stop him from doing the incredibly hard work of becoming who he needed to be. Have you ever noticed that the greatest danger in your life isn't always the thing that hurts you, but the thing that makes you stop growing? Sometimes what delays us the absolute most isn't suffering at all, it's comfort. The most dangerous place isn't where you're in pain, it's where you are just comfortable enough to completely forget about your journey.
Just take one of Odysseus's very first stops, the island of the Lotus Eaters. There are no epic battles here, no scary monsters, zero immediate danger. The people there just offer his crew a simple piece of fruit, the lotus. It doesn't chain them to the wall or try to kill them. It simply removes the desire to leave. It makes them forget they ever even wanted to go home in the first place. And that is terrifying, right? Because it traps them entirely through comfort, rather than through pain.
Now let's bring this ancient myth straight into your living room. The modern lotus isn't some magical fruit. It's just one more episode on Netflix. It's just one more scroll on social media to see what your second cousin is doing. It's one more distraction, which seamlessly turns into one more year gone by. So many people today are entirely trapped by lives that are just comfortable enough to stop them from asking the deeper questions. They aren't actively unhappy, but they certainly aren't fulfilled either. They're just comfortably asleep.
This right here is the true insidious trap of comfort. The modern lotus doesn't whisper, destroy your life. It whispers, you can begin tomorrow. And tomorrow is so incredibly dangerous, because tomorrow very easily becomes 10 years of being comfortably asleep, constantly putting off the hard work of individuation and returning to your true, authentic self.
So how do we wake up? How do we finally get off the island? Well, the first step isn't suddenly becoming hyperproductive. It is remembering your why. Returning home to yourself doesn't start with intense military discipline or the latest life hacks or listening to motivational speeches. It starts by simply pausing and remembering what you have forgotten about your true purpose. Because once you actually remember why you're trying to return in the first place, the how suddenly becomes incredibly obvious. So I want to leave you with a question to really examine in your own life today. Where are you comfortable enough to forget who you are becoming? What are the modern lotuses in your life right now? The Odyssey isn't just some old dusty poem about a guy in a boat. It is a brilliant psychological roadmap for your own life. It's challenging you to recognize your shattered maps, to beware the incredibly subtle trap of comfort, and to remember your why so you can finally find your way back home.
Okay, picture this. You've survived a brutally long war. You've crossed an absolutely unforgiving, relentless sea, and you've managed to escape death more times than you can count. But then, one day, you find yourself trapped inside a cave. A giant stone seals the entrance shut. Outside, the ocean is just waiting. And inside, a monster is eating your friends, literally one by one. It's a completely cinematic, ancient setup, right? And you probably recognize it as the classic story of Odysseus and the Cyclops.
What happens next is this incredible battle of wits versus brute strength, and Odysseus actually wins. He gives the Cyclops wine, brilliantly tells the monster his name is Nobody, and then manages to blind him. After that, he and his crew pull off one of the most clever escapes in all of literature, snaking out of the cave completely hidden under the bellies of sheep. It's genius. The danger is over, the ship pulls away, they are safe. Honestly, the story really should just end right there.
But it doesn't. In this completely unexpected twist, Odysseus stands up on the deck of his ship, looks back at this blindingly enraged monster, and just shouts across the sea. He yells, "I am Odysseus. I was the man who defeated you." He ruins the whole thing. He had already survived, so why in the world would he risk everything right now?
We're going to dive into how this 3,000-year-old myth actually maps perfectly onto modern neuroscience and the very real monsters lurking inside the human mind. The Odyssey isn't just a fantasy about ancient Greek monsters, it's practically a blueprint of our own psychology.
The trap of the ego.
So let's start with the first major trap of this journey, which is all about the ego. It taps into this desperate, deeply ingrained human need we all have to be seen, to be recognized, and to be remembered. In the story, Odysseus simply cannot resist announcing his real name. And why? Because we all desperately want our identities confirmed. We want the world to validate the story we tell about ourselves, that we're strong, that we're smart, that we're the winner. But look at how modern psychology views this. Neuroscientists have found that when our identity feels threatened, the exact same parts of our brain that process social pain actually light up. Being ignored or dismissed, that hurts deeply. Not because we're in physical danger, but because our identity is under attack. Homer somehow understood this 3 millennia before brain scanners were even a thing. And this brings up a really crucial question for us today. How many of our own greatest mistakes happen not during a crisis, but right after we've already survived it? Think about an argument that was basically over until you just had to have the last word, or a relationship that could have easily healed if pride hadn't gotten in the way. Sometimes a victory turns into a defeat just because getting the credit mattered more than getting peace. For Odysseus, one boastful sentence brought down the curse of Poseidon and literally ruined the next 10 years of his life. It really makes you wonder, maybe intelligence isn't the opposite of foolishness, maybe ego. Navigating the unpredictable. Now think about the backdrop of this whole story. There is this silent, relentless character that Odysseus can never actually defeat, and that's the sea. It's always there, quiet, restless, totally unpredictable. Sometimes it carries him beautifully, and other times it tries to drown him. And honestly, life is remarkably similar. We spend years trying to control absolutely everything: our future, other people, our reputation, our perfectly laid plans, our health, our sense of certainty. But life just keeps behaving exactly like the ocean. It's beautiful, it's completely unpredictable, and it is entirely uninterested in what we expect from it. The big takeaway here is that wisdom isn't about learning how to control the sea. It's about learning how to navigate the waves. Which brings us to a moment where navigation completely falls apart. And it's not because of the water, but because of the mind. At one point, Odysseus receives this amazing gift. The Keeper of the Winds seals every dangerous storm inside a leather bag, leaving just one gentle wind free to blow his ship straight home to Ithaca. The journey's basically over. Home is literally right there on the horizon, so Odysseus finally lets his guard down and falls asleep. But his crew, they start staring at that mysterious bag. They start whispering, what if he's hiding treasure in there? What if he's keeping all the riches for himself? So they open it. Every single storm escapes at once, and they are blown all the way back across the sea. Modern neuroscientists actually have a term for this: predictive processing. Your brain isn't just passively observing the world, it is constantly guessing, constantly inventing reality whenever information is missing. At first glance, this feels like a cautionary tale about curiosity, right? But it's actually about a lack of trust. The winds didn't destroy their journey, suspicion did. Our minds are these incredible storytellers, and when they don't have all the facts, they hate leaving a blank page, so they invent. They assume the worst. Think about how many modern relationships collapse, not because anyone actually did anything wrong, but because an imagined betrayal quietly replaced reality. This whole theme of the mind playing tricks on us leads directly into one of the absolute weirdest moments in the Odyssey. A woman named Circe welcomes the exhausted crew. She gives them food, wine, a place to rest. And then they turn into pigs. Literally. Now, for centuries, people treated this as just pure fantasy, a witch casting a magic spell. But let's look at this a little differently. What if Homer was actually describing the very real psychological state of unconscious instinct and automation? Like, what actually happens when human beings stop living consciously? We just eat, fight, panic, consume, and repeat. Without self-awareness, we don't necessarily turn into a totally different creature, we just become a lesser version of who we already are. We surrender to our base instincts. It really reminds me of this profound observation from the psychologist Carl Jung. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Now, Homer obviously wouldn't have used those exact words, but the metaphor he created is just unforgettable. People becoming animals, not because of some mystical curse, but simply because they gave up their awareness. Kind of makes you step back and reflect on your own life, doesn't it? How much of your day are you truly choosing? And how much is just yesterday playing out again on autopilot?
Descending to move forward. To snap out of that autopilot, almost every great story has this counterintuitive turning point. The hero has to go down, not up toward the light, but down into the darkness. For Odysseus to finally find his way home, he is told he has to literally walk among the dead in the underworld. It feels completely backwards, right? Shouldn't the path to life go as far away from death as possible? Well, psychology shows us something fascinating here. The memories and emotions we try to run away from, they don't just vanish. They stay in the background, shaping us, and they usually come back wearing masks. Anger, anxiety, numbness, control, perfectionism, withdrawal. The hard truth is that profound growth can never be found while you're comfortable. It has to be confronted. It's just fascinating how perfectly this ancient myth overlaps with modern mental health. The ancient Greeks pictured a hero literally walking into the land of the dead to chat with ghosts. But in modern therapy, the realization is exactly the same. Healing demands that we stop running from what came before. To actually move forward, you have to turn around and face your past. It's totally different language, but it's the exact same journey. I want to pose this question directly to you, just as something to reflect on. Have you ever noticed that the parts of yourself you try the absolute hardest to leave behind somehow always manage to find you again? Maybe they aren't actually chasing you. Maybe, just like those ghosts in the underworld, they are just waiting to be understood. By the time we reach the end of this epic, Odysseus has outsmarted monsters, survived literal tempests, escaped witches, and walked through death itself. And yet, for so long, he still wasn't home. Which tells us that all those external physical obstacles were never the real reason he couldn't get back. When you really look at it, maybe the journey was never actually designed to change the world around him. Maybe it was designed to change the one person trying to cross it. The real monsters were never just out there in the ocean or hiding in caves. They were the ego, the suspicion, the unconscious habits, and the unhealed past inside his own mind. Just a little something to think about the next time you find yourself facing a storm of your own.
I want you to just pause for a second. Really think about this question. Who are you when everything familiar disappears? When the title, the daily routine, the environment you completely rely on is suddenly stripped away? This is the core question that sets our entire journey in motion. And it's a question life is inevitably going to ask every single one of us.
Okay, let's dive right into this by looking at one of the most famous scenes almost everyone remembers, the Sirens. Beautiful voices floating across an endless sea. Most people kind of assume the Sirens sang about pleasure, right? Like wealth, power, or sex. Well, they didn't. If you listen carefully to the original story, they promised something far more terrifying and alluring. They promised absolute certainty. They basically told Odysseus that if he came closer, they would tell him everything that had happened and everything that would ever happen. The absolute greatest temptation in one of humanity's oldest stories was just knowing exactly how the world works.
Now, what's truly fascinating, and honestly a bit spooky, is how strangely modern that temptation feels. Because today, the Sirens don't live on distant rocky islands anymore. They live right in our pockets. Just think about your daily life. Every single day, our attention turns into this vast ocean, and it is just filled with voices constantly claiming they know exactly what's going on. Someone is always promising to explain this insanely complex world to you through, one viral video, one ideology, one sensational headline, or one perfectly curated algorithm. Every single voice is singing out, "Come this way, I have the answer." So how does Odysseus actually handle this overwhelming temptation of certainty? He does something totally remarkable. He doesn't puff out his chest and pretend he's stronger than the temptation. Instead, he asks his crew to physically tie him to the ship's mast. He knows for a fact that the version of himself who will be hearing that song simply cannot be trusted. And this brilliantly illustrates such a profound truth. Real strength isn't about blinding willpower. It's about humility. It's understanding yourself well enough to prepare before you fall. I mean, how many mistakes do we make today simply because we trust the version of ourselves that isn't thinking clearly? The angry version, the exhausted version, the afraid version. True self-mastery has perhaps never been about control at all. It's about this kind of humble preparation.
Let's see how this builds as the journey gets even more difficult. Eventually, Odysseus reaches a place where there is literally no right answer. On one side, you have Scylla, a monster that will inevitably take 6 of his men. On the other side, Charybdis, this massive whirlpool that will swallow absolutely everyone. He has to sail through one of them. Imagine carrying the weight of that decision. It's an impossible choice. The burden here isn't asking, how do I save everyone? It's agonizing over the terrifying reality of who cannot be saved.
When we're kids, we often believe that wisdom just means finding the perfect, painless answer to every single problem. But life teaches something much, much harder. Sometimes, wisdom means choosing which pain you are actually willing to carry. We don't like hearing that, do we? In our modern lives, we want life to reward every good intention, every kind heart, and every careful decision with a perfect outcome. But life isn't a puzzle where every piece fits flawlessly together.
Being an adult means accepting that love cannot remove every tragedy and leadership cannot remove every sacrifice. And then, after the monsters and the impossible choices, the journey becomes strangely quiet. No storms, no battles. Just an incredibly beautiful island belonging to the goddess Calypso. And she makes Odysseus this unbelievable offer. "Stay with me," she tells him, "and you'll never grow old, you'll never die, you'll never suffer again. I will literally give you eternity. No more grief, no more uncertainty, no more fear or heavy responsibilities." I mean, look at that list. Most people today would look at that and call it absolute paradise.
But Odysseus, he calls it something else entirely. He sits by the sea, day after day, just weeping and looking toward a tiny, flawed island called Ithaca, a place far less comfortable, where he will age, where people will let him down, and where he will eventually die. So why on earth would he reject a comfortable eternity? Because there is something way more important to the human spirit than comfort: meaning. Comfort just asks, how can I avoid pain and how can I stay safe? But meaning asks, what is this pain for and what kind of person am I becoming?
So, the absolutely crucial point here is that a life of pure comfort without meaning is actually a trap. This explains so much about our modern world, doesn't it? It's exactly why so many people today feel strangely empty, despite living in relative safety and material abundance. It's not because they lack comfort, it's because comfort was never meant to be the final destination. The greatest prison might not be built with iron bars at all. It might just be built from everything you've ever wanted, except purpose.
It takes 20 years, 20 long, agonizing years after leaving his home of Ithaca, Odysseus finally returns. But Homer, being the brilliant storyteller he is, does something completely unexpected here. He doesn't let the hero just walk triumphantly through his front doors to epic music.
Instead, the goddess Athena disguises Odysseus as this old, frail beggar. Why? Well, because before Odysseus can reveal himself, everyone else in his home must reveal themselves first. The loyal remain loyal. The selfish remain selfish. The arrogant become even more arrogant in the presence of someone they think is a beggar. The disguise doesn't actually hide Odysseus. It acts as a mirror that reveals everyone else's true character. And maybe life does the exact same thing to us. The difficult seasons we go through, the times we are brought low, they don't necessarily create our character, they uncover it. And right here, amidst all the tension of his return, Homer gives us one of the quietest, most heartbreaking scenes ever written. At the palace gate, lying in the dirt, is an old dog named Argos. 20 years earlier, he was Odysseus's lively little puppy. Now, he's blind. He's weak. He's covered in dust, completely forgotten and ignored by everyone in the palace. Except one. The moment Odysseus, still completely disguised as a beggar, walks past, Argos lifts his head. His tail moves, just once. Despite the magical disguise, despite the 20 years in the dirt, the old dog recognizes his master. There are no grand speeches here. There's no swelling dramatic music. There's no grand celebration. There is only quiet, pure recognition. And then, having finally seen his master come home, Argos dies. You have to ask yourself, why would an ancient epic full of warriors and gods pause for the death of an old dog? Because Homer understands something incredibly profound about the human heart. Recognition is one of the absolute deepest forms of love. To be truly seen, past the disguises, past the years, past the wear and tear of life, is to finally come home. And this brings us to the ultimate paradigm shift of our explainer today. For a long time, it's been so easy to think the Odyssey is just a cool story about a man physically crossing a dangerous ocean. But consider this. The ocean was simply visible. The real journey, the true epic, was completely invisible. When you view it through this psychological lens, the entire story totally transforms. Every terrifying monster wasn't just a physical threat. It was a way of becoming lost in our own lives. Every beautiful, distracting island was just another version of forgetting who we really are. And every raging storm was a question. Who are you when everything familiar disappears? Think about your own life for a second. The moments that changed you the most were rarely the ones you actually planned, right? The heartbreak, the failure, the goodbye, the unexpected beginning. What if those weren't detours? What if those were your very own Odyssey? What's really wild is that this ancient wisdom is echoed everywhere today. Modern neuroscience tells us that healing isn't about erasing our painful memories. It's about integrating them, allowing them to be part of a larger story. Carl Jung spent his entire life in psychology describing this exact movement. The goal isn't becoming perfect, it's becoming whole. And for centuries, spiritual traditions have spoken of awakening, not becoming someone else, but stopping the belief that we were ever separate. Different centuries, different fields of study, yet they are all literally pointing to the exact same horizon.
Maybe that is exactly why every human civilization tells stories about leaving home. Because every human being will eventually have to leave the version of themselves they once believed was complete. Life will break you, love will change you, loss will humble you, and time will reshape you. And somewhere in that messy middle, you're going to wonder if you'll ever feel at home again. But home was never a physical place waiting for you. It was a person you were slowly becoming.
The distance Odysseus had to travel wasn't just geographical. The distance between who he had been when he left and who he needed to become to truly return was vast. And that is the journey we are all secretly on. We spend our entire lives searching for our place in the universe. But maybe the universe has been quietly guiding us toward our place within ourselves. The day you stop feeling divided, the day you stop running from your own shadow and welcome every broken, fearful, and beautiful part of yourself home, you realize something extraordinary. The world hasn't changed, you have. You are not perfect, you are whole.
And so, as we wrap up this exploration of our own internal epics, I want to leave you with one final thought to carry with you today. Look at your own detours, your own struggles, and your own endless ocean, and ask yourself, what if the storms weren't preventing you from getting home? What if the storms were teaching you what home actually is?